If you missed last week's announcement, I wanted to share a brief update and a few thoughts before getting into this week's episode. Please excuse this intrusion or skip ahead to the next timestamp if you just want to hear about board games. Decision Space has been on a 2-week hiatus for my parental leave from editing. On December 5th, my wife and I welcomed our first child, and it has been all hands on deck since then. For those keeping track at home, here's an amazing stat for you. This marks the third child welcomed by a Decision Space host since the start of this project, bringing the collective total from 0 to 3. As I sit here and think back to what our lives were like when this podcast started on little more than a whim, it is amazing to think that this show has now been part of the fabric of our lives spanning these most important milestones. And that makes me think about our listeners. So many of you have been with us since the beginning, or at least a long time now. As the show has been with us, it has been cool to think that it has also been with you on your commute, at work, mowing the lawn, or during more profound milestones and changes of your own. Thank you for being along with us on this ride as listeners, gaming partners, colleagues in unpicking the intricacies of the language of games, and so many other ways that you show up in our community of listeners. For me, the end of the year is always a time for reflection. So I'm curious to know, what has changed in your life, big or small, since you started listening to this show? Please let us know by email at decisionspa@gmail.com, Discord, or on social media where we are now on Blue Sky. And lastly, if you're so inclined, I want to make our annual appeal for end-of-year support for the show. If you've enjoyed the 50-ish hours of free listening this year, then please feel free to give back as it suits you, whether that is sharing our podcast with others online, leaving a review of the show, or supporting our Patreon for as little as $1 a month. All these things not only light up our day, but genuinely help our show be as successful as it can at achieving our interdecisional mission that we set off for several years ago. Especially because of this recent hiatus, pushing our show metrics down, a boon of podcast listeners and support at the end of the year would really cap off this monumental year for Brendan and I on a high for the podcast as well. Okay, a happy holidays to you and yours, and enjoy the show.
What you looking at? What you talking about?
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
Today we're talking about Quintessential Brendan Games. I cannot wait to get into your taste, and I think this episode is so exciting because it's really just all about what makes you tick as a game player.
Well, I'm really excited too, Jake, and I'm a little bit nervous, I will admit, but I enjoyed the episode we recorded about your quintessential games a few episodes ago, mostly because I like talking about you and the games you enjoy, and we wouldn't have done as much of this podcast, almost 200 episodes if that wasn't true. But I also found it really interesting for just exploring we often come at games from we end up at the same conclusion about games, but we arrive there from such different directions. So it was interesting sort of teasing out the reasons why. And I thought it was also just such a useful lens for thinking about why I enjoy certain aspects of games that other people don't. And I think we heard that from our audience too. So I hope if you're listening, this is maybe about me on paper, but it's also about all of us and the way that we might think about games or might not think about games. And I think you'll get a lot of value, hopefully, from this episode, exploring a whole different range of topics, because Jake and I tend to like the same games for different reasons and different games for different reasons.
This frame allows us to bring all of our different lenses, all the different types of terminology that we talk about on the show, bring it together and see how different aspects of games, different characteristics of games, different aspects of decision space come together just right to create a game that's perfect for you. I think this is going to be a very fun episode, and we should just dive right into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's start here, the same place we started last time around in the companion episode about me, which is game length. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to take a stab. I'm going to say, this is what I think your tastes are based on all these conversations that we've had together and playing games together. And then you tell me if I'm right. Feel free to push back if I'm wrong. And we'll just have a great conversation from there.
You'll be my looking glass, and we'll see if I like what's staring back at me and if I can accept the truth that you spit about how I
Yeah,
approach games.
I
Okay,
love
let's
it.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll start with the length. And I think this one is very clear. And I'll just come right out with it. I think you prefer short games.
Yeah.
Not that you don't like games of all lengths, right? But for you, in playing games in your life, short games tend to fit in best. You play with your spouse a lot. You tend to play the same game over and over, so you can go all the way through the score sheet at certain times in certain cases. And I don't think you could do that with games that are lasting an hour or longer. So I think that's why I think short games are your bread and butter for the quintessential Brendan game.
Yeah, I think there's some people who prefer short games because they like to experience lots of different games. And in a game night, if games take an hour or less, you can fit in maybe what, 3, maybe 4, depending on maybe 6 if you play a lot of really quick games, maybe even more. Depends on how long your game night is. And I like that. I like playing lots of games. But I also like playing, as Jake, you alluded to, the same game a lot. I really like exploring a game and sort of seeing the depths of what it has to offer. And between my life, I have 2 young kids, being structured the way it is, and then also my proclivity for replaying games, maybe more than the average hobbyist, for better or worse. I like games that I can play in an hour or less. I think that's really fair. There's exceptions. If you and I are going to be at a convention together, or maybe if we just found ourselves having a weekend together, I love I there are times when I want to play the 3 hour, maybe 4 hour. I'd have to be a really good reason, but at least a 2.5, 3 hour game. There's a place for that. But once we pass the 3 hour length, I get itchy. There's like the opportunity cost bugs kind of come all over me, because I just sort of think this is good, but I feel like I've seen what I'm going to see out of this play. What if I could play a different game twice and see how the game twists and turns? Babylonia comes to mind as a game that I think fits sort of my platonic ideal of a big box game for its length. I want a game that fits a lot of game. That respects my time. Get a lot of game in there.
Yeah. Awesome. And you said a lot in there that I think points to what games fit in with you beyond just length, wanting to play them a lot over and over and wanting to see how they twist and turn over subsequent plays. Not all games are going to really offer that. So I think that's a useful nugget as well. Yeah, and I agree with you. Even if I'm having a great time playing a 3 or 4 hour game, especially if it's like a convention setting, if I'm seeing the friends next to me having a great time playing 2 or 3 different games that and then putting them back away, like missed out on that one, that can be a tough pill to swallow, even if I'm having a great time with what
Yeah.
I'm doing. Okay, so we'll tick that box. Short games is the preference, and we're going to use a little. We kind of have a chart here. Upped Manatee in our Discord put this together based on my episode, so I'm going to use this as a loose guide, going through essentially characteristics of the decision space that we talk about on every episode. Let's not dwell too much, but what I want to do is I'm going to guess between 1 to 4 where I think you are, and you tell me if I'm right on or where you might put yourself. So the
Okay.
first one we're going to do is decision space clarity. So this is ranging from 1, approaching crystal clear decision space, to number 4, approaching I have no concept whatsoever what's going to happen if I push this button. And I think for you, Brendan, I am going to put you at a 3. I think you like a lot of opacity in games, not all the time, but I think because of your preference for getting in the head of your opponents, having like a lot of the variance and randomness come from decisions your opponents are being made. Those are things that tend to add a lot of opacity to a decision space. So that is where I would put you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a stronger desire to play games. I tend to lean towards uncertainty and the game state being hard to parse, or not even just hard to parse, but there being randomness that is impacting my ability to know what the right decision might be. Some sort of uncertainty that is factoring into the decisions. I don't like a game that is prone to analysis paralysis usually. I think Tikal is a good example of this, right? Where I like T-Call. I think it's a good game, but I think I like it despite how puzzly it is and
Mm-hmm.
how clear it is. And there's also a fair amount of uncertainty into call, right? The tiles that come out are meaningful uncertainty that I think takes a game that is palatable for me, that makes that game palatable for me. Whereas you're like, that's great. You want to live in the land of like, I'm going to sit and puzzle out all of my turns completely. And I think the reason why I like a fair amount of uncertainty is I don't want to feel immense pressure to search for the absolute right answer. I want to play instinctually, and I want to iteratively play a game such that I can improve my instincts, not just improve my ability to solve a puzzle. That's, yeah, I think that's the core of it. I want to play instinctually. I'm an instinctual player.
Yeah, getting to a place. What I'm hearing you saying is, getting to a place where you know for sure that this card is better than this card because of like math, right? Like I know the odds. I know I've done the work to get to the point that I know this is the more optimal play, is less interesting than getting to a place where you're kind of just able to like vibe it out, right? It could be
100%.
thing, right? But you're not really like you haven't like honed in necessarily like heuristics. It's more like case by case basis. I feel I've seen similar situations like this before, and therefore I know this is a direction that's like worth pursuing.
Definitely. And I think part of that comes from I like playing games with enough uncertainty that it's hard to make claims around this card is objectively always the best, or
Right.
this action is objectively always the best in this situation, right? Where because I like
Because
the idea that I can play instinctually and sort of say, I know if I do this, it will usually probably play out in the way that I think it will, because I've played enough that I think this is true. And also, I like thinking about games. Also, because of A, B, and C, this feels like the right thing to me.
right.
And maybe someone else could come in and say, no, because of D, you dummy,
Right.
I can math this out. And I'm like, whatever, okay.
Right. And I think that like implies something about the mechanisms at play here, right? Where there is either a certain amount of randomness or a certain amount of interactivity that can create the conditions where even, a well thought out play, a solid fundamental play could be inverted just by sheer chance or, by an opponent doing something unexpected.
Yes, I love that. That's good. Games need more of that, in my opinion. Or if a game has more potential for that, I tend to like it more. Games like Broom Service and stuff like that.
This is good because the next thing on this chart I'm looking at is deterministic to randomness. I think you're 4. Like
Okay.
I think and that doesn't mean 4 is like you want things to be completely random, right?
Yeah.
Obviously we're not saying like agency doesn't matter, but compared to like the average gamer, like on the bell curve of preferences, I think you're on, if not an outlier, kind of pushing the far end of like allowable randomness to be in the game system.
Yeah, it doesn't bug me at all. It's like,
Okay,
raspberries on a summer day. It's fine. It's good.
right. It's good.
Um,
Okay, so you agree,
yeah.
probably a 4 for randomness.
Yeah, I don't typically feel like I'm in control in my life, so I don't necessarily need to feel in control of games, but I do in life like to think that I can make the right decision off instinctually most of the time, and I would like to be there in my games too. I Chess obviously is a game that comes to mind, right? The only uncertainty is what moves your opponent will make in response to your own. So that's pretty low uncertainty game. Um, and I like chess, but it's not a game I've ever felt any desire to go deep on. It's a game I've played on and off my whole life. And I invariably am like, Jake, I want to play chess. And then I will spend maybe at best 3 days studying openings. And then I'm in shambles as I sort of say, I don't like chess. I am
Yeah.
not interested in this exercise, right? Where there's an objective right thing I should be doing and that I should study the book and know what I should be doing. I'm disinterested. Someone else can do it.
There-
If you know,
and there's something interesting here because when you play chess, you play at chess.com or whatever, and the
sure,
computer will tell you like this move is
is the
bad,
right one. Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh,
This
sure,
move
sure.
is
Yeah.
right. This move is optimal. And that is the case in chess, but it doesn't have to be the case in all games, right? There
Yeah.
are games, decision space allows for sort of certain game states to exist where there is no like optimal move, right? Or
Yeah, pure
or
solution games versus mixed solution games,
right,
right?
exactly. There could be
Yeah,
a best move, right? This is the best move most of the time, but if your opponent does something unpredictable, right, or has a certain card or a certain die result comes up, then it was actually wrong, and that'll never happen in chess
yeah,
because there's no way for that to play out with all the components there in clear day. Okay, so I think I highlight that because I think that's a good example of something that you're looking for in games. The next one here is tactics to strategy. And this is a big question and honestly, kind of a tricky one because it can be quite hard to understand where tactics end and strategy begins
yeah.
and vice versa. But I think you're more of a tactics guy than strategy. So I would probably put you at a 2 out of 4, meaning, in the middle, but on the tactics side. The reason I come to that conclusion after playing a lot of games with you is mainly that it feels like we play a lot of tactical games on Board Game Arena together. Those are ones that you're drawn to.
Yeah.
We, strategy games, I think, when I think of strategy as the inverse of tactics, I start thinking a little bit more of stuff like chess, right? I'm gonna like try for a specific opening this game and and learn about that. And maybe next time I'll try a different opening and based on what my opponent's doing, you could do it doesn't have to be chess, it could be root, right? Where you have different factions that have different strategies to play out, where it really feels like you want to be heading for something at the beginning of the game. And I think you're much more interested in kind of the way you study and think about games is zooming in on more just smaller bits of interaction. A couple of turns being a move and what happened there.
Yeah.
In games that allow for lots of iterative moves like that, allow you to have a lot of opportunity to kind of like study those more microscopic interactions than like study the whole arc of a game.
Yeah. I feel like we've sort of backed our the truck of our conversation right up to the answer here because we talked about how I like to play instinctually. And I think instinctual play is tactical play in a lot of ways, right? It's sort of saying, okay, I'm presented with these factors. What's the best decision to make right now? Independent of, okay, I'm going to think broadly about these systems. I'm going to choose to take this path through the decision space because I think that this is the right path for these factors that I can see within the first 3 turns of the game, or even stepping back, playing a card game, a trading card game or something. I think the meta is going to be this. So I'm going to do this. And I like that a little bit, right? Because I like thinking about what other people want to do and then trying to exploit that for my benefit in games. I like donkey space in games. And that gets into it a little bit, but just once and highly strategically. And I think part of the reason why I don't necessarily why I prefer tactical games that emphasize tactics, is that oftentimes those games present opportunities to play instinctually, right? It's not that it's a game like A Feast for Odin. A Feast for Odin is a game where you can't really play all that instinctually. You get these cards that sort of inform special powers you can do, and then you're presented with 90 things. You just do any of these 90 things. You have to think strategically about what you're trying to do there. And I like A Feast for Odin. I think it's a really cool game that I'm glad I've played. I'm glad it exists. But it's not a favorite game of mine. It's not a quintessential game. And part of that is because it's asking the player to do strategic thinking that I can do, that I like talking to other people about, but it doesn't feed my gaming soul. It's not why I've come to the
Right.
table. Uh,
In
yeah.
in A Feast for Odin, when you're taking the hunting action, right, you're hoping to get like 2 tiles.
Yeah.
And it's not just about that. It's about the fact that, next turn you're going to upgrade one of those tiles, and the turn after that you're going to exchange that upgraded tile for something else. Is that kind of what you mean when you say forcing you to play strategically versus tactically?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes when you play tactically, right, you're dealing with the hand you've dealt yourself through your past decisions. So maybe I choose to do this because in the Year of the Dragon as an example. So this is a game that actually maybe doesn't seem like it would be a game that I would like because it's fairly clear from the start what the arc of the game will be. There's this, you randomize a bunch of elements at the beginning, but then it's known to all players what the course of a specific actions will be. And then, but then there's this cool system where every turn you shuffle these action cards together and make groups, and then you take turns picking from them. And that actually makes the game, the initial frame of sort of laying out all the events in order, giving everyone perfect information of the whole arc of the game in terms of the events that players are going to have to deal with. That says make strategic decisions at the start of this game about how you want to play. But then the action system says, okay, I know I asked you to be a strategic player, but this is a tactical game. You have to take the strategy that you think is going to work and then make purely tactical decisions every turn and iterate on the strategy you thought was optimal. And that's where I want to live, right? I like thinking strategically, but I want someone to be throwing wrenches at me and everyone else, not just me. Throw them at all of us. And let's see how we all dance around the wrenches. Because I find that for some players, Richard Garfield talks about honers and innovators, right? Some players are perfectly fine with finding an optimal strategy and then just doing that over and over and over and over. That's fun. That feeds their gaming soul.
Hell yeah.
They want to find the good thing and do the good thing over and over and over. And to me, that just sounds painful, boring. It doesn't. I'm disinterested. If I find a button that's good and I can push it, I'm excited. And maybe I'll push it 3 or 4 times and that feels good. But I don't want to come back and push that button every time I play the game. I'm not interested in doing that.
Yeah, you might push that button to the end of the game, but the next time you're going to go off looking for a new button to push.
100%.
See if you can find another good button.
Exactly.
Not me.
yeah, once you found the button that's working, make someone else tell you.
That's one of the biggest, just to pull back the curtain, that's one of the biggest differences between us when we play games together is exactly that, right? Well, because we will often play so many games together, to prepare for a deep dive episode, and I'll feel like, man, I've really got Brendan's number. I'm doing so good with this strategy, and then I'll look over at Brendan's board, and he's just doing just utter nonsense, just trying the most like random, off the wall, certainly not going to work strategy, just to see what he can learn. And that's how you're having fun. And it's totally fine. It's a little bit different from the way my brain works.
And I think part of that is because for me, there's really great value in understanding why a game works the way it does, right? And I'm not saying you obviously feel that way to an extent too, Jake. That's really we wouldn't have this episode if you didn't.
I honestly think that as we talk about strategy versus tactics, like 90%, 95% of what we're talking about when we say let's characterize the decision space of this game, we're thinking about tactical turn-to-turn decisions more so than zooming out and considering different strategies, right? Like, okay, did we go, to use a feast for Odin as an example, we're not thinking about, is it a good idea to go big whaling strategy versus a hunting strategy versus an immigration strategy.
And I think when we end up there, we typically end up there because a game's strategic offerings have over-centralized the decision space so much that we feel like we're ignoring parts of the game that the designer wanted to exist for players to experience. And we feel when we cover those games on the show that we have to speak to that, often because we feel frustrated that the game is forcing us to do certain things because it's right. We always want to play to win, play as it, because knowing that the objective is to win. And if there is a strategic path that is so centralizing that you have to ignore aspects of the decision space, that then grinds your gears because you want to think about the game holistically. And for me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to show up and do this 7 more times. Like, a game that has prescriptive openings, clearly there are games that are like that. Puerto Rico is a game that, has been played by tons of people. And there's sort of these set openings that you're supposed to take or that are like known as like, these are the optimal starting moves. To me, that's clearly a game that so many people love that I don't know. But for me, I want to just try the other thing. Why not try the other thing? See what happens. Maybe it'll be cool. Or maybe you'll lose, but you will have done something interesting and learned something.
I know what's going to happen.
Sure. But and sometimes I want to know why it's not good enough.
Right.
Also, right.
Yeah. You want to have that experience for yourself, and it's going to be deeply unsatisfying. Yeah. And we've talked about like it's honestly like a death knell for us for a game when it's like, oh yeah, there's this like powerful opening.
Yeah,
Then it's like, well, what's the point?
sure. It yeah. Hmm.
Okay, let's keep
Let's
going.
move on. Let's keep
Move
going. Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And so you're more tactical. I put you at two. So we talked before about search versus. Well, we talked on my episode about search, and I really enjoy search in games. On the other end of that spectrum, it might be more evaluative. So instead of like trying to understand what moves are available to you, and then from there what might be good, which I really enjoy, the other side might be games that have a very streamlined decision tree, but interesting decisions. So instead of like trying to understand what moves are there to be made, you know what two or three moves are possible, and the game is then about evaluating those moves and trying to decide which is best. I think you might be a 4 on evaluate. I think you really tend not to enjoy the search part of games very much at all.
Jake, is Age of Innovation a high search game?
I think so.
Yeah, I do too, because I'm so disinterested in doing the homework in that game to find the right move, you know? I don't mind search. I like a little bit of search. I wouldn't like Kramer and Kiesling games if I didn't like a little bit of search, right? But I want the 80-20 rule to be in effect. I want 20% of my effort to get me 80% of the way there, and then I want my instinctual knowledge as a player to get me 40% more so that I'm making or 20% more so I'm making the optimal decision.
Search and evaluate are not opposites. They can
Yeah.
feel very similar, right? If you're thinking through what moves are possible on a complex board of 5 tribe, or thinking through like, a bandwidth testing sequence of like, if I do this, then this might happen and that could result in this and that could result in this. Those could be similar feeling things. So it's not like you can't enjoy both these things. It's just a more
Yeah.
subtle distinction.
We're talking about doors, right? Doors to explore decision space, right? Paths. How many doors exist is search. What doors should I go through is evaluation. And I
Yeah.
think you want to make sure in terms of search, you like search.
Yeah.
You have fun
I want to
sitting in
spend a
front of a
lot of
game.
time figuring out
Yeah.
what doors got
What
the
options
goods.
there are. Yeah, totally. And I like playing my games. I say, in jest a little bit. But I find oftentimes that the exercise of of search, the more effort I put, the more frustrated I get that I don't find even better solutions. And sometimes that's not true, right? There are absolutely games, Jake, where you can have those aha moments. You spend 5 minutes looking at the game state and you go, that's it. I found the move. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that can be cool. But I would rather get into a flow state through looking at the board state saying, okay, these three decisions seem roughly right. Now I want to spend my 5 minutes toiling on which one I walk through. So my aha moment is I want to come through looking back at the feedback of going through all those doors and sort of knowing it was the right stringing together of those things.
Awesome. Couple more here on the chart, and then I've got some other just characteristics that don't quite fit in here, but I think are really important to understanding your quintessential games. And the next one is multiplayer solitaire on one end, and then interactive on the other end. I think that you really, really prefer interactive games, but I don't think that is necessarily the case. I mean, some of your absolute favorite games have relatively low interactivity.
Yeah.
Uh, Cascadia being one of them. And we're not talking about multiplayer solitaire like no interaction. I struggle. I don't think you're a 4 on interactive. I could see you honestly at a 2 or 3, somewhere in the middle. But I'm curious what you think on this one.
I think that for some people, whether a game is interactive or not is going to make or break the game. They're just disinterested in interactive games, or they're disinterested in highly interactive games. And for me, I think both have a place in my life, and I need the right context to fit it. So I like
Mhm.
both types of games a lot, but I need to play them in the right context. If I'm going to sit at a table and play Cascadia, I want to play it with 2 people. I don't want to play it with 4. because it's not an interactive game. But if I'm going to play, and the flip side is I am so happy to play the Resistance, which is a purely interactive experience, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. Right? I love all types of. I love interactive games. I love non-interactive games. It doesn't bother me one way or the other, as long as I'm playing it in the context that feels right for the game to
Awesome.
me. Yeah.
So you
Fair.
so right in the middle, I
Yeah.
think,
Sure.
and then the last one here is on board games versus above board game. And I'm thinking about this sort of as like, where is the focal point of play? Like, are people looking at their boards, or are people looking up at each
Yeah.
other, making eye contact, and that probably tells you a lot about whether you're playing an above the board game or an on board game. So a 1 would be like whoever does best on the board is always going to win. A 4 would be like whoever does the best at like the game that's happening above the table is always going to win, like
Yeah.
a Resistance. I think here you love the above board
Yeah.
stuff,
For
and I
sure.
think you'll even try and like shoehorn it into games that are mostly on the board. You still want to do the above the board and like make sure people are like engaging that, and even sometimes like maybe perceiving a little bit more above board elements in games than most
Then
people would in a
yeah.
design.
100%. That's definitely true. Babylonia is a game that I think is an outlier for me and my taste, because Babylonia actually primarily exists on the board. It's a game where you could ignore everyone else's behavior at the table and just play tactically, make your strategic decisions once you've committed to the paths, and that could be the experience. And you could get most of Babylonia out of it. But you're right, Jake. When I play games, I want them to be. I like the social aspects of the games, even if they're not inherently social. There's exceptions. Cascadia is not much above the board at all.
That's
Outside of
true.
the few moments where maybe you hate draft something and the person that you're playing with looks over and is like, why'd you do that? But on the whole, if I'm playing a board game, I do want it to live above the board to some extent, because I want to be thinking about what other people are doing
Yeah.
and to have that inform. Which maybe that's uncharitable to minimizing it in some way, but I think it's gesturing in the direction I want. That's important at the very least.
I've had the experience playing games with you a lot where you, in general, pay way more attention to my board in a game than I pay to your board.
Interesting.
I think that's been my experience. Like a lot of times, you'll be like, "What did you think when I did that?" If we're playing like asynchronously on Board Game Arena, or like, did you realize I had done X, Y, and Z? Is like, ooh, not really, man.
The thing is,
Because
yeah, I didn't think about that at all. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I think that's great, and I think it's definitely something important to know about you and the games you're gonna like, is that you're gonna be really paying attention to those above board elements.
Yeah.
Okay, so some other things, and these are kind of just like noticings and characteristics that I think games have that you really enjoy, that may fit in there, but to drive a finer point. And the first one is donkey space. You
Yeah.
love donkey space, and this comes, I think, from your background in being an esports commentator for the Pokken fighting video game. So we've talked about donkey space a lot on this podcast, but it is essentially this idea of knowing the mind of your opponent. So if
Sure.
Brendan knows I want to attack, but I know, so then he's going to block, but I know that he knows I want to attack, so he's going to block, and then so I choose to grab.
Yeah.
That is kind of the donkey space dance.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I like that, Jake, is it's an opportunity for connection through play, right? It's to sort of say, I see you and you see me. And sometimes it can feel bad. It can be, connection that feels terrible. In El Grande, you know that I know that you know that I know that I'm going to do something before I even know that you know that I know it. So then
Yeah.
you make the decision and then you pull the rug out from under me and it feels bad. But then you step away from the table and it's sort of cool that you were able to sort of perceive that and make that guess and be right. And sometimes it is just a guess, but that's okay too. I really like that about games, and I think it keeps them fresh. I want who I'm playing against to matter as much as the game I'm playing.
Totally. It's so interesting because, El Grande is not necessarily a game that everybody would see donkey space in.
Sure.
So I think that in of itself says a lot about who you are as a gamer. And what we were talking about with like the above the board play. People see interaction, right? Of like,
Yeah.
I'm taking over your space, you're taking over my space, but maybe not necessarily to the extent of I know that you want to go there, so that I might not go there. You're right, doing that whole song and dance. Other people might just say, "I'm going there."
Yeah. Totally.
The other thing I want to say about the donkey space is this really puts a finer point too on the idea of kind of This is like the ultimate sort of intuitive play in games, right? Where
Yeah.
you can't really have donkey space in chess, um, but you know donkey space is always going to be about playing intuitively because there's in a rock paper scissors there's no edge for finding an optimal move, so that the only edge you can find then is by kind of like knowing the mind of your opponent and understanding them, and the situation perhaps around that game of rock paper scissors better than somebody else.
Totally. Though I will say, I don't know, because you said that I can see it in games that no one else does. And I think there are elements of this, right? Where if I know that in reaction to a Rui Lopez, you always make this move, and I know, right? Like there's
Wait, what did you say? In react to what?
so there's a certain opening, like a Rui Lopez opening, right? That's the name of a
Uh-huh.
specific opening you can play. If I know that if I take this move, you're going to do that opening, maybe I could force you into a line. I don't know
In
if chess
chess.
players actually do this. Yeah, but maybe. I don't know. I think it could be there just
There
a
are, I
little bit
mean, there, yeah.
at high
I
level.
want to like keep this on board games and not go into like fighting game talk, but like there's sort of like an
Totally.
element of like setups, right? Like where I'm gonna,
100%.
yeah, right. We could go deep, man.
Yeah.
Okay. So you like Donkey Space. Here's another one I'd like to try on to you, sir. You like signposts.
Yeah.
And this might not be a surprise from or for the person who kind of put this term on the map, at least for me in our podcast, the one about signposts. But here's why I think you like signposts, and this is
Okay.
signposts being elements in games where the designer is intentionally cluing players into what is important and what matters to them. So I want to kind of pull back a layer, like why is that something you like in games? I think one, you like to learn, and signposts are often a shortcut to learning and improvement. But also, I think you like games where mechanical systems are celebrated rather than hidden. You want to see like the clockwork in motion more so, than a game where maybe a lot of that is kind of like hidden in a deck of like sort of nebulous construct.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I I definitely like well signposted games. And part of that, this is tough because I do really like repeatedly playing games, right? And you could see how someone who really likes repeatedly playing games might not like signposted games. Might like games that just say, "Here's a mess, you'll figure it out." Play it a bunch and you can unpick this knot. But I do think that there's something about well signposted games that to me feel part of what I really love about games. I don't know if this is true, and you can just tell me if I'm totally off base. Is that I like being able to talk about games with other people. I think that's an important part of my games. We talked in the last episode we did on rules about how one of the ways that I lean on rules is I care deeply about rules facilitating a shared experience. And even as a designer, I tend to not prefer to play with house rules, even though I love designing and think about how games will change, because I like to be able to go and talk to other people about their experience in games. And I think signposts shorthand our ability to have meaningful conversations with other people about games, because they lend games enough focus that if people have only played them one or two or three times, you can sort of say, well, you got this about it. Where maybe not well signposted games, you can't find the footholds to jump into those conversations as easily.
I think yes. And I would go further and say that signposts also put you in conversation with the designer in a certain way,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Where it's almost like a designer note that shows up, like a signature or something that
Yeah.
shows up in the game where the designer is telling you, I think this is an important thing.
Yeah.
And that kind of can help us understand a lot about kind of the game and the designer's like intent with it. And that's
Totally.
something that I think really matters to you. Um, And it's kind of saying like, here, this is the mechanism that I want you to be focusing on and paying attention to.
Totally.
Yeah. So maybe it's not a straight continuation from it, but games where like the mechanical system is celebrated rather than hidden. I think like you want to know the makeup of a deck of cards, right?
100%.
You
Or
don't you
King
Yeah.
Domino's tile set. I came to the conversation having found a manifest of all of the tiles that exist in the game because I thought it would be frivolous for us to have a conversation in which we didn't at least have that. And it's not like before I play King Domino with Maya, I'm going to sit down and lay out all the tiles and study them. But I thought it was useful for this pursuit at least. So yes, I want to understand the makeup of a deck before I make decisions about what's in it.
So yeah, so why do you think why is that so important to you in a
Well,
game?
even if I can stomach uncertainty, I still want to make meaningful, informed decisions, and I don't want it to feel frivolous what I'm doing.
Mhm.
So if I don't understand what's in a deck, I can't understand. I'm not getting reliable. I'm not making informed decisions, and then the feedback that I'm getting might be flawed. Right? If I'm making a decision based on something that I don't fully understand, and then the game tells me it's bad, did I not understand the game correctly, or was my decision bad? I care deeply about feedback. That's something else about, I think, when I play. I want to play a game and then to know, to have a, in some ways, like you said, I want to be in conversation with the game and by extension, the designer. So I want the game to reliably tell me what I did right and what I did wrong. And part of what we were just talking about is that if I don't have a strong understanding of the game, like what's in a deck, I can't get meaningful feedback, and that's going to prevent me from understanding. And
Yeah.
it feels frivolous to me.
Yeah. You're fine with randomness and opacity in the decision you make and the outcomes, but not in the mechanism.
Yeah, I want to know my odds.
Let's take the game of Quantum that has like a very, to me, that is a great example of this, what I'm talking about, of like celebrating the mechanical system. Just like, here they are. Like, this
Yeah,
is the dice movement and power.
yeah,
Um, and you could have that same system. And then on top of it, you have a hand of cards that everybody's going to play that's going to do some extra maneuver. And on top of that, depending on, uh, a whole extra player sheet where you might have bonuses in certain sectors, or right, it could become like so much to where like the cleanliness of that
fades away.
mechanism fades away. And I
Yeah,
think you would prefer the former, the clear mechanism that your brain can just see and understand and then start like learning about.
yeah, yeah. Some people just like chaos in their games, right? And I like high uncertainty, but I don't like chaos. I want to understand the system, and I want the system to feel fair. I want it to be clear. It's okay if it's nuanced. It's okay if it's complex, but I don't want it to just feel chaotic for chaos' sake. And I think sometimes designers trying to make opaque certain deck configurations or designs is trying to bring a little bit of that, and I resist that a little bit because I want us all to know. Because
Hmm.
I can't understand why you're doing what you're doing if we don't all know that, have a source of truth
Right.
that can inform why we're doing what we're doing, right? So in like a game like Broom Service that I think fits this category, it's a board game, but I have to think about what other people are doing because I might be able to take an action that could take away your action if I figure out what you want to do. If there was some hidden element, Jake, or if your witch was slightly different and you had this asymmetric power that shifted my ability to really understand your decision making, I get way less interested. And some people get way more excited. Like
Yeah.
Root comes to mind, right? Oh, it's so much more complex. But then I can't think about why you're doing what you want to do quite as well because the game's just not showing me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, cool. Let's keep going, moving the conversation forward. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. One other thing you love, in my opinion, is a classic game feel. You
Yeah.
like numbers on cards and games that have that as the primary component. And you could look no further than the three uh, published Brendan Hansen games that I've played that all sort of fit. They're all very
Yeah.
different games, but all fit into like a classic card game feel, the primary components, deck of cards, and you're doing really interesting and different things with the numbers on them.
Yeah, two of them, Ramen and Enchanted Plumes, are just literally numbers on cards, shuffle it up, deal hands, and then you play fairly different games with them. Ramen, you're trying to build these different bowls, and sort of playing chicken almost with the other players, but mathematically. And then Enchanted Plumes, you're building these tableaus of feathers. We decided in this episode, one of my own games can't be a quintessential game of mine, but I think Enchanted Plumes would be for a lot of reasons we won't get into. And then there's Unrest, which is sort of this weird outlier. It's this sort of asymmetric game in which one player is playing as the rebels, trying to make these objectives based on the getting cards of these different types and suits and values into these districts. And then the Empire is trying to figure out, surprise, surprise, what the other player is trying to do and prevent it from happening. So yeah, I really love games with a classic feel. And I think part of that, Jake, is I like games that we did a whole what we talk about on elegance and how fraught that term is and how it almost doesn't really say anything, but is sort of getting at this truth behind games. And when I sit down to play a game, I think it's so cool when you can play a game that feels like it could have always existed. And it just today, just this last year, just this decade, someone figured out that this is a game that should exist, and then they just make it. It's just like, why didn't this exist before? That's really cool and fun. Azul, why didn't this exist before? You know? Even
Totally.
Sushi Go. How did we get to whatever 2000 whatever without someone sort of saying, "Oh, you could make a game like this," you know? It's
Totally.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. We've said the same thing about My City before. Like, how is this not
Yeah.
Tetris?
Yeah. My whole line of if My City was installed on Windows 95, it would be as popular as Tetris.
Yeah. Okay. I want to move the conversation forward to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss your list of games. But I wanted to say one thing that I think that you're not a big fan of,
Okay.
and that is logistical chains in order to do something that you want to do. And
Say
often
more.
this is so you are pretty cool on relatively cool, not that you think they're bad games, on like some of like the Vladimir Suchi games we played, like
Yeah.
Messina and Praga, where in my theory here, and I think this might
They're pretty
be true of
strategic
other
games.
games as well. They're pretty strategic games, and I think that they're like hard to do the actions that you want to do a lot of
Yeah.
times. Like I think this is going back maybe to like I'm not liking to kind of confounding systems. Like I want to be able to know the mind of my opponent and react to what they want to do. So it can kind
Yeah.
of get in the way of that when you may know what I want to do and want to react in a certain way, but you can't
I
because of
can't touch
some
you.
constraints in the game that you like
Yeah.
didn't plan for ahead of time. Or you know that I might want to do, but then I can't do it because I'm also constrained by the game. So like
Yeah.
these games that have like complex logistical chains of thinking in order to like just play it efficiently at a baseline, I think is getting in the way for you of a lot of what you enjoy about games we've talked about in this episode. And like, and not in a particularly fun way.
I'd rather set my opponents up than set the game up.
Yeah.
And not set the game up in terms of
Wait,
set
what
the
do you
game
mean
up
by
on the
that? Like
table.
set, yeah.
I mean, I'd rather spend time creating a situation in which I can exploit my opponents. Like Quantum comes to
You
mind,
want to be
right?
the challenge for your opponent, not like have the
Totally.
game as like this like over large looming third person that's challenging us both, and yet we're like indirectly competing with each other.
Totally. I think that's exactly. I'm happy to string together a long sequence of actions to create a game state that's going to work to my advantage in Quantum. I'm less interested in searching through Praga, Caput, Regni, seeing all the options available to me, figuring out that this one gives me a marginal benefit and doing that 30 times and then I win because I did it 30 times and you did it 25 times.
Yeah,
You know?
totally.
That's just
All
it.
right, great. Well, I think that a pretty good overview of a lot of the things that I kind of noted about your games, as
I
well as
have
some
one
of the
question.
general one. Yeah, and I was going to ask you, kind of, what did I miss? What must you say when it comes to your taste?
How would you characterize my tastes about asymmetry and symmetrical game? Because you tend to prefer symmetrical game. If someone says, Jake, this is a brand new game. No, scratch that. Jake, this is a classic game that's been out for 20 years and it has asymmetric player powers at its core. You're starting to move away from the table, and they'd have to say something pretty enticing to make you take a step closer.
Yeah,
Where do you think I fit?
I think I think you align more with me. A game like Root loses a lot of appeal for you because of everything we've already said about like I want to be able to play against my opponent. I don't even know what they're doing, so they're playing a totally different game than me. So like extreme asymmetry seems like something you wouldn't like. I also think asymmetry tends to lend itself more to like strategic intrigue than tactical
Mm,
intrigue for
yeah.
those same reasons. You might have, obviously, depending on your strategy, like there's interesting tactics there. Uh, but yeah, so I would say you lean more towards symmetrical.
I do think you're right, but I love things like Zuvadis, and asymmetric player powers are a huge part of that. But they're mechanically quite important, and they're pretty simple. And I think fun personas to sort of take on jokingly. It's fun to be like, I'm the crocodile or whatever. They
Yeah.
just feel crocodile-y. I like Cosmic, but both of those are great examples of highly social games that have asymmetric player powers. Unrest is a highly asymmetric game in its structure, but you can know the other side and the decisions that each side make very clearly. That's baked into the design. And I do think you're right that part of this comes down to you don't want a prescription for fun. Don't
Mhm.
tell me how to have fun. And sometimes asymmetric games like Root maybe sort of say you're gonna do the game this way, and that's gonna make a better game experience for everyone. And for a lot of people it does. But for me, it's sort of like I want to figure out how I want to play the game. I don't necessarily want to be told you're going to be the bird guy and the bird guy's going to be
Yeah.
this within this
Yeah.
game space.
I think I understanding where you're coming from now, because all the games you've mentioned, you wouldn't say, "Oh, in Cosmic you have to play the squids like this," or in
Sure.
Zuvadis you have to play the ostriches in this way. Like here's the ostrich strategy guide. I don't even know if there is ostrich. I think there might be, or maybe the ostrich are the things that block you. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? Like
100%.
where and that makes that and if there's not strategy guides and that's not part of the conversation, that probably leads you to be like you're playing like a tactical or a social game that has like some asymmetry versus root, right? Where it's like here's you're playing the birds, here's like your guide, focus on X, Y, and Z with the birds.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. All right, yeah, I'm glad we touched on that. I'll just share the games that I thought would fit for as a quintessential Brendan game. So if you played these games, it would give you a lot of the things that Brendan is looking for and loves in games. The first one, BattleCon, and the reason I brought that up is it's like the quintessential for me fighting video game translated to board game with donkey space galore, and even has some numbers on card action.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 100%. BattleCon is on my list too, Jake. And
All right, we crossed
it
over.
is purely because of simultaneous choice. I love that every game of BattleCon is the play loop is we're gonna simultaneously make a decision about our actions based on the game state. We're gonna think about it, then we're gonna resolve it, see what happens. I think that's important, right? See what happens. That's the feedback, and then we're gonna make another simultaneous choice and just do it again and again. And I might make decisions to obfuscate my ultimate plans. I might make decisions to set up certain things with the game. And all of that to me is fun and interesting. And if I'm making small strategic decisions along the way, great, right? If I know I'm playing this character, also that's a highly asymmetric game, right? Every character is different. But I like sort of saying, okay, this character kind of wants to do this. How can I make that my own? What can I do that's sort of different that the other person wouldn't expect along the way? Yeah, BattleCon's awesome. Why can't we play more BattleCon?
Dude,
We should.
okay. I think my first three might be ones we've crossed over, and the last two definitely not. But we'll see.
Okay.
The second one I put was Fox in the Forest. This was sort of
Mm,
my like classic card game feel. That BattleCon doesn't really invoke like the classic games. I might have put Enchanted Plumes 2 for this
sure.
slot, but I couldn't pick that, so I picked one I know that you love. It also kind of like has a lot, ticks the box like short game, repeated play, good game with spouse,
Yeah.
etc.
I I completely see why Fox and the Force is on the list, and I think that there's absolutely a different universe of my list that has Fox and the Force. I love the decision point where you have to think, am I trying to win or lose tricks? To me, that pulls the whole game together. And there's a little bit of an element of what I like to call the hubris test, right? A game that lets you sort of say, forces you to look at why you made the decision that you did and maybe kind of feel great or terrible about it. So the game that I had on my list, Jake, that fits this is Lost Cities. Lost Cities has that
Nice.
classic card game feel, and Enchanted Plumes is very inspired by Lost Cities, but it also has this really cool wager mechanism where before you play any cards to an expedition, one of the 5 rows that you're playing things to, Unrest also has 5 rows. Again, I'm very inspired by Lost Cities. I think it's an incredible game. But there's these 5 expeditions, and you play these wagers that will double the value of points in that row. And they could be doubling positive points if you do really well there, but it could also double the value of negative points, because whenever you start an expedition, aka playing a wager there potentially, or maybe just playing a card of value, you get negative 20 points immediately. So I think that's cool, and it gives me feedback about not just my decisions within the game, but also it's like a gut check for myself in a way, and I just think that's cool. Do you think it's fair to call that a hubris test?
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah. Okay.
No, that was already making me think of quite a few other games that have similar kind of tests like that. I was actually lost in thought, but I'm
A
back.
future episode.
That'd be great. Okay, the next one is, and I'm wondering if this might actually be more of like an outlier or an exception than I thought when I put this list together. Now that we're at the back end of the episode, but that is Cascadia.
Hmm.
So Cascadia, the reason I picked it is, again, it's like a shorter game. It's one that I know you love playing with your spouse. I think we didn't talk as much about this because we kind of ran out of time, but I think one thing that you also really enjoy in games is like overlaid objectives. You like drafts and discrete sets of things, whether it's cards or tiles or tokens or whatever that have like a really interesting texture to them. So we didn't really talk about that, so that's kind of a fail, but that's why I picked Cascadia on my list.
I'm glad that you just mentioned all those things, Jake, because all of that rings true to me. I do really like drafting games, and I overlaid objectives where you're having to think about how can I stack these things and fit that scoring puzzle together, fit my taste very, very well. So Cascadia seems like a slam dunk. And then I also, if I'm gonna play a puzzly game, I tend to like it more at 2. I think for what I mentioned earlier about them being less interactive typically, but I also just sometimes like chill games. And Cascadia sort of fits that. We talked about sort of comfort games at one point. Cascadia is my pick for that. Enchanted Plumes is kind of that, right? We're all going to sit down. We're going to do a nice thing. We're going to mostly be nice together. And maybe every once in a while we'll do something where we take something that someone else wants, but we never hurt them, or we don't take it directly. We just take it from a pile that they wanted to take from. Cascadia and Enchanted Plumes both share that. And I like playing these sort of chill, puzzly comfort games too. They're a huge part of my taste, and I don't think a quintessential Brendan list would be complete without a game like that. So it's there. Those are the games you can play 50 times or 100 times,
Totally.
or at least that I can.
All right, this next one is going to be out of left field for you.
Okay.
The reason I picked it is because of what I was talking about, like games that sort of like wear their mechanisms on their sleeve. I also wanted to pick something that was sort of on the less interactive, more on the table side of things, because I do think that you enjoy a lot of those games. And the one I picked for this slot is Dice Hospital. I also picked Dice Hospital because you rated it a 9 and I rated it a 5. And, and that made me think that in some way this must be really kind of like an outlier preference for you. So I went with this really kind of novel, clever, mostly multiplayer solitaire dice placement game.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wait. And so it's because it feels novel and clever, the mechanisms. Is that what you're saying?
Really, this was like, I was thinking of Quantum for this slot, which probably
Yeah.
makes more sense. But like to me, something that's really quintessential about you is like you like games that have like very clear mechanisms. And I think dice are often great for that because like
Yeah.
dice, you can like know the odds. Like we all understand intuitively how 6-sided dice work. Maybe Welcome to would be a even
I do
better
love
pick for
Welcome
this.
to.
Something where it's like, like it's celebrating kind of like simple, intuitive mechanisms. And and that's kind of like the star of the show.
I think that's insightful. I no longer would rate Dice Hospital a 9. I'm shocked. Maybe like a 7.
Maybe I
Um,
shouldn't have put it on here.
but I do. I do like that game. I think there's cool stuff there. I don't think it's executed perfectly. I want to play Dice Hospital 3. That doesn't exist, but I bet that game would be really
Yeah,
cool.
I'm subbing. Let's scratch the Dice Hospital. Let's just say I said welcome to for this
Welcome to.
slot.
I
Yeah.
do love Welcome to. I find it incredibly interesting and charming. It's mathematically really clean
Yeah.
and elegant. I don't know that. Yeah, I think for sure. I love Welcome to. For me, what I might put here, and Welcome to actually has this, which is it's very nuanced in Welcome to, but it has a spatial element. You have to do the numbers in ascending, descending order. Cascadia also has this spatial element. And a game that I seem to enjoy way more than most people, this might just be because I podcast with a key hater, is KeyFlower. I think KeyFlower is a quintessential Brendan game. And there's a couple reasons. It's a hobbyist midweight game that's going to play in, if you're playing lower player counts, like 90 minutes or less. It is interactive, but it also has this cool spatial element, this logistics puzzle where you're building out your tiles, trying to arrange them in certain ways that I've heard people ad nauseum complain about how it ruins the game for them. And I'm just like, buckle up. I'm going to build my village better this time. I love that spatial puzzle. I think it brings the whole game together and it's fun and interesting and gives the game a little bit higher of a skill ceiling than it would have and doesn't feel like homework to me. KeyFlower is just brilliant. I just love KeyFlower. So, but it definitely the spatial element helps. Babylonia is like the other game that I think has a lot of the things that I love. It's the simple rules that you were talking about. It's Knizia game. I love Knizia, but I already have Lost Cities. So I put KeyFlower in this spot.
Nice. Yeah, I wanted to put Babylonia, but then I want to just like stay away from just picking like your top 10 games,
Games, yeah. It's fair. Yeah.
But yeah, I think some of your top 10 games are also probably games that would say the most about your preferences as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like ham-fisted to just pick something that we don't like as much that's filling the same slots.
Sure.
The last one I picked, my fifth one was Lost Ruin of Arnak. And I picked that because I think it was sort of the game that helped illuminate signposting to you. I think it's a game that does a really good job of that in a game that perhaps otherwise wouldn't appeal to you nearly as much. I think there's also fun for like I wanted to pick kind of a more Eurocentric like resource and efficiency game because I know you do dig a lot of those as well. And I think this is a good one for that in that it has again the signposting. It has a little bit of that above the table play as you're jockeying for position on the research track. Going for the different spaces on the board it feels pretty tight and also the items. So I think that for kind of like a Euro efficiency game that speaks to Brendan, Lost Ruins Arnak is a good choice. What do you think?
I like that game quite a bit. I also one of the things that I like about it is how it does deck building, and I will argue it is deck building in such a different way. It's sort of it makes these meaningful small changes, but uses the same language to do something totally different, and that's interesting and cool. It's interactive. The blocking is just right for me. It hits a sweet spot in that game. I love the cards. We haven't talked a ton about this, but I love card games, right? I love Magic the Gathering.
Yeah,
I've just played it my whole
cards.
life. I love Keyforge. It has the sort of novel card plays that you can evaluate. Like if I'm going to evaluate, that's where I want to do it. It's not too simple and tough. That game has a nice flow. I think I tend to care a lot about the pace and the feel and the flow of a game's arc. And that game has it for me. It sort of starts really slow. You're not accomplishing much round to round. And then you get some better cards in your deck. And then all of a sudden you're chaining together these actions and you're zooming up the research track. And it's sort of, how far can I push this? I don't love that game, but I could see how it would be a quintessential Brendan game. It's also simple, right? It's not overly complex, but manages to still be pretty interesting. And I think does provide good feedback to the player. Typically, you can know what you did wrong.
Well, if you don't love it, it's probably not the best choice. I'll give myself 3 out of 5 for my picks. Have you played Santiago?
No, but I think Santiago is
that was gonna be on my list too. That's like my honorable mention, but I wasn't sure if you had played it or not, so I left it off.
Anytime I hear about Santiago, it just I know that's a game I'm gonna love. My fifth one.
So what else did you have on your list that we haven't already spoke about? Like what? Start over and then reveal new ones. So like tell what is your actual 5 quintessential game list?
You covered it pretty well. So I have BattleCON for the simultaneous choice games, really emphasizing the sort of getting inside the mind of another player, Yomi, Donkey Space stuff, Cascadia for puzzly chill 2-player games. In that, there's a spatial element there. Lost Cities for classic card games and a hubris test. I want a game to be a looking glass, just like you are in this conversation. I want it to tell me something about myself when I play, and maybe tell me something about someone else too. The people I'm playing with. KeyFlower, because it's sort of this, the spatial element is there. It's highly interactive. There is a lot of thinking about what sequence people are going to do certain things, and I like the interactive dramatic moments of blocking people and how bad that can feel. I don't mind feeling bad in games. I tend to prefer meaner games than I think some people. I think sometimes when people say they like interactive games, they mean mean games, and I don't always mean that. But I do think I like meaner games more than some people. I like In the Year of the Dragon quite a bit. That's a game that's mean to you. And I like KeyFlower, a game where you can be mean to other people. So the final game that we hadn't talked about yet is, I think a quintessential Brendan game is The Mind.
Ooh.
So The Mind is weird. It's zany. It uses numbers on cards. It inverts, in my mind, the whole structure of games in general by saying, okay, you're just doing stuff. Whenever you feel like doing it, just do it. It's the rules fit on a single, very small piece of paper, but it's interesting to think about. It's nuanced. It's different depending on who you play it with. It's sort of a trick. It is also social. You can't play that game by yourself. I think a lot of games that I enjoy are games that you can't only play by yourself. And obviously there's exceptions, right? I could play Cascadia by myself and just see how I did. It's not quite there, but it's the same. Lost Cities, that's tough. I don't really want to play Solitaire Lost Cities. BattleCON, impossible. The Mind, impossible. And KeyFlower by yourself, there's
No.
probably solo rules, but that's not what I'm signing up for, you know? So that's another sort of trait. And it's also, as a designer, something that just annoys me is I like to, it's fun to be able to play test your own games, but it's hard when you like playing games that rely on other people's decisions to really inform them. So those are my 5. KeyFlower, The Mind, BattleCon, Cascadia, Lost Cities. 5 quintessentially Brendan games.
I love what you said at the end about kind of like wanting to play games with other people. And that makes me think you are a 4 on interactive.
Okay.
I think I was honestly maybe, and this is an important takeaway, I think, for podcast listeners, if you made it this far, I think you are perhaps doing a better job being more objective towards games in our ratings than I am. I think you've given a lot of high ratings to games that don't feel like quintessential you games because you think that they're like so well done in other ways. And I think like my ratings maybe tend to be a little bit more like,
do I like it?
From the heart. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's magnanimous of you, and also maybe true, and partially how sometimes I miss the mark with maybe something like Dice Hospital. But I do try to, because I also, and you also just love games, but I just love games.
Yeah.
And I like experiencing all types of games. So I try as much as possible to not let whether or not a game feels like a good fit for me or a game I'd want to own impact how I talk about it on the show, if I can help it. I try to be objective, which is silly because it's all subjective, but that's okay.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. We did it.
There you have it. Those are 5 quintessential Brendan games.
Yeah. Do you have closing thoughts, or can I tell the listeners a secret?
My quick closing thought is like, it's a little bit hard being on this side of things. Like I felt like I was on the hot seat. You know, you did such a good job in the other episode where now I'm like, oh man, do I even know Brendan at all? But now at the end of this episode, I really feel like I've learned a bit about you as a gamer.
You're very sweet, and you did a great job. You nailed it. You had 3 out of 5. That's incredible. We're 3 out of 5 where you picked the same game as me. Yeah. This was really interesting. I hope listeners found it interesting. In some ways, while recording the episode, the quintessentially Jake episode, your episode, it was great because the minute we finished the episode, I knew it was interesting. And on this side, I'm sort of like, was this episode of value at all? I have no idea. But I will say for listeners, Jake and I we've never done this before. This is the only episode in Decision Space history that we have tried and failed to record 3 times. This is the 3rd time. I hope it was a charm. The first time we made it 30 minutes in and we lost our recording. The second time, the first time we really tried a few times. Then that happened. Then we just tried a second time, crashed after 10 minutes, Jake? And now here we are.
I spilled water all over my pants.
Yeah, but we did it.
Yeah, we got there. It feels good. Brendan, thanks so much for recording this episode with me. As always, thanks so much to our listeners for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this. Again, let us know what you thought. I think this could be a fun format to bring guests on and do. It seems like people liked the first one, so we'll see if they like the second one as well. And then we could potentially move forward with that plan. Until next time, we should thank Hembry for intro and outro song Reach Out. You can find more things Decision Space at decisionspacepodcast.com and join the conversation on Discord.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, y'all. Coming up, know that at some point in the future, we'll cover Mexico, and we will likely have a break. No, we will have a break at some point in December. We're going to try to do our year-end episode at some point soon. And yeah, we're so excited for 2025 Decision Space. Wow. That's going to be amazing.
It's going to be
Jake,
awesome.
Thanks for everything. Thanks, Hembry. Come talk to us. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Hold close tonight.